In the bustling city of Lagos, Nigeria, where legal battles were fought with words sharper than swords, Judge Aisha Adegbite was a name that commanded both reverence and fear. A woman of power and influence, she had carved a formidable reputation in the legal world. She was known for her strict rulings, unwavering stance on justice, and a cold, almost ruthless approach to upholding the law. With a towering presence in the High Court, Aisha's judgments were rarely questioned. Her courtroom was a battlefield, and she wielded the gavel like a weapon, ensuring that no criminal walked free under her watch. Lawyers who stood before her knew better than to challenge her unnecessarily. Her sharp intellect and unyielding sense of discipline left no room for compromise. But behind the polished robes and the unshaken demeanor, Judge Aisha Adegbite was a woman of contradictions. The image she portrayed in public, a pillar of fairness and morality, was not always reflected in her private life. Married to Barrister Tunde Adegbite, a well-respected criminal defense attorney, Aisha had everything a woman of her status could desire: wealth, status, and a husband whose influence matched her own. Together, they were considered a power couple in Lagos elite legal circles. However, there was one aspect of her life that she had not chosen: her stepdaughter, Saad Adegbite. Saad, Tunde's only child from his previous marriage, was an 18-year-old university student, bright and ambitious, but fiercely independent. She had inherited her late mother's soft features and delicate beauty, a painful reminder to Aisha that she would always be second in her husband's life. From the moment Aisha married Tunde, she struggled to bond with Saad. The girl was not openly disrespectful, but she was indifferent, never making an effort to bridge the distance between them. Aisha, who thrived on control, saw Saada's attitude as a silent act of defiance. Aisha ran her household the same way she presided over her courtroom, with strict rules and no tolerance for disobedience. She expected Saad to live by her standards. No late nights, no unnecessary friendships, and above all, no distractions from her studies. But Saad was not the kind of girl who conformed easily. She was warm, expressive, and social, the complete opposite of her stepmother. While Aisha believed in structure and discipline, Saad lived for freedom and experience. She had her own dreams, separate from the rigid expectations placed upon her. This contrast in personalities made their relationship unbearable. Every interaction was a battle of wills, Aisha issuing commands, and Saad pushing back with silent resistance or cleverly worded arguments that often left Aisha fuming. To make matters worse, Tunde was often absent, traveling for work or buried under legal cases, which meant that Aisha was left to raise Saad alone. Tunde, blind to the growing hostility, believed his wife was the perfect guardian for his daughter. Aisha resented the burden. She had not signed up to be a stepmother. She had married Tunde, not his past. Over time, Aisha's frustrations grew into something darker. Every smile on Saada's face felt like an insult, a challenge to her authority. She could see the love and admiration Tunde had for his daughter and, deep down, it bothered her in ways she refused to admit. She found herself looking for reasons to discipline Saad, turning every small mistake into a crime. A missed curfew became an act of rebellion. A poor grade in school was proof of irresponsibility. Even the way Saad dressed, vibrant colors, fitted jeans, was seen as a sign of disrespect. But the real turning point came when Aisha noticed Saad becoming more secretive. She had begun sneaking out, smiling at her phone, and staying out later than usual. The judge's instincts screamed that something was wrong. Aisha had built her entire career on uncovering lies and exposing criminals, and now, she was determined to find out what Saad was hiding. Little did she know, the secret she was about to uncover would push her beyond the limits of reason and into the depths of a crime that would shake Lagos to its core. Saad Adegbite had always been a free spirit, a girl who lived for the thrill of youth, for the simple joys of laughter, music, and stolen moments of happiness. But in her father's household, under the watchful eyes of Judge Aisha Adegbite, every step she took was scrutinized, every choice she made was questioned. She longed for a sense of freedom, for something of her own, something beyond the rigid structure Aisha had imposed upon her. and she found it in the most unexpected place. In Kunal Olatunji. Kunal was 25 years old, a struggling musician who lived in the apartment complex next door. He wasn't from a prestigious family, didn't have a law degree, and didn't wear the expensive suits of the men Aisha deemed respectable. But to Saad, he was everything. They had met by chance. A casual exchange near the gate of their estate that turned into long conversations under the evening sky. Kunal had a way of making Saad feel seen, something she had never experienced with her stepmother. Where Aisha saw her as a disobedient child, Kunal saw her as a young woman full of dreams and possibilities. It didn't take long for stolen glances to turn into secret meetings, for whispered words to turn into passionate embraces. Their love was intoxicating, reckless, and most of all, dangerous. Because if Judge Aisha ever found out, there would be hell to pay. Saad knew the risks, but she didn't care. Every night, after Aisha had retired to bed, Saad would sneak out, meeting Kunal just a few blocks away. They would sit in his tiny apartment, listening to old records, talking about their dreams. His of making it big in the music industry, hers of escaping the suffocating walls of her home. With Kunal, she could be herself. She could laugh without fear, love without judgment. But the danger of their affair was always a shadow lurking in the background. Aisha was not a woman to be deceived. She had spent years tearing apart criminals on the witness stand, exposing lies with nothing more than a sharp gaze and a cold tone. If she ever caught Saad, the consequences would be unforgiving. The first time Aisha suspected something, it was a small thing, a shift in Saada's behavior. She had started coming home later than usual, her excuses flimsy and hurried. There was a lightness in her step, a glow on her face that Aisha couldn't place. One evening, as Aisha sat in the living room reviewing court documents, she heard the sound of a phone vibrating against a surface. Curious, she turned her head and saw Saada's phone buzzing on the dining table. Aisha had never been one to pry, but something about the way Saad had been acting made her uneasy. She picked up the phone. The name on the screen sent a wave of fury through her veins. Kunal Olatunji. Aisha's grip on the phone tightened. She had seen this name before, the young musician who lived next door. She knew his type. Lazy, unfocused, living off fantasies instead of hard work. He was exactly the kind of man she had fought her entire life to keep away from girls like Saad. Her lips curled into a frown. This had to stop. When Saad returned home that night, she found Aisha waiting in the dimly lit living room. The air was thick with tension. "Where were you?" Aisha asked, her voice calm, controlled, but laced with warning. Saad hesitated. "I was with friends," she lied. Aisha held up the phone. "Friends like Kunal Olatunji?" The color drained from Saada's face. She had been caught. Aisha rose slowly from her chair, stepping forward. "Do you take me for a fool?" she asked, her tone icy. "You think I don't notice you sneaking out, giggling at your phone, coming home smelling like men's cologne?" Saada's hands trembled. She knew she had to choose her words carefully, or she would lose everything. "I love him," she finally whispered, her voice defiant but shaking. Aisha's expression turned to stone. "Love?" she repeated mockingly. "A foolish girl like you does not know the meaning of love. You are ruining yourself over a man who has nothing to offer you." Saada's anger flared. "Just because you're incapable of love doesn't mean I am." The slap came so fast that Saad didn't see it coming. A sharp, stinging crack echoed through the room as Aisha's palm met her stepdaughter's cheek. "You will not disrespect me," Aisha hissed, towering over her. "I will not allow you to disgrace this family." Saad held back tears, refusing to give her stepmother the satisfaction. But deep inside, she felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, because now her secret wasn't just a forbidden romance. It was a battle against a woman who always won, and she had no idea just how much she had already lost. For weeks after Aisha discovered Saada's secret relationship with Kunal, tension filled the house like a ticking time bomb. The judge had tightened her grip on the young girl, imposing strict curfews and monitoring her every move. Saad was no longer allowed to leave the house alone, and her phone was regularly confiscated for inspection. But what Aisha didn't know was that it was already too late. Saad had been feeling strange for weeks. At first, she ignored the warning signs. The sudden fatigue, the waves of nausea in the mornings, the way certain smells made her stomach churn. She blamed it on stress, on Aisha's suffocating rules. But then, her period never came. Panic gripped her chest as she sat alone in her bedroom, staring at the calendar. She counted and recounted the days, but the truth remained the same. She was late. Dread coiled in her stomach. Couldn't be happening. Kunal had always been careful, or so she thought. But now, with every passing day, she couldn't deny it anymore. She was pregnant. Saad couldn't tell Aisha. She couldn't even tell her father. She knew what would happen if they found out. Her stepmother had made it very clear. Kunal was a disgrace, a mistake that needed to be erased from her life. And now, a part of him was growing inside her. She couldn't let Aisha win. So, she did the only thing she could, she hid it. She began wearing looser clothes, skipping meals to keep from gaining weight. She forced herself to act normal, pretending everything was fine even as her body changed in ways she could no longer control. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, no matter how hard you try to bury them. Aisha was no fool. She noticed the small changes, how Saad avoided certain foods, how she seemed more tired than usual. One evening, as they sat at the dining table, Aisha watched her closely. Saad picked at her food, barely eating. "You haven't been eating properly," Aisha commented, her eyes narrowing. "Are you sick?" Saad shook her head too quickly. "I'm fine." Aisha studied her for a long moment. Lying to a judge was never a good idea. Then came the moment that sealed Saad's fate. A few nights later, Aisha was walking past the bathroom when she heard Saad vomiting behind the door. She stopped, listening. The retching sounds were unmistakable. A slow, chilling realization crept over her. Morning sickness. Her pulse quickened, anger bubbling beneath her skin. No, couldn't be. Aisha waited until the next morning to confirm her suspicions. While Saad was in the shower, she entered her stepdaughter's room and began searching. She rummaged through drawers, flipped through books, checked every corner. And then she found it. A positive pregnancy test hidden in the back of her wardrobe. Aisha's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the 2 pink lines. Her worst fear had come true. The rage that surged through her was unlike anything she had ever felt before. It wasn't just anger. It was humiliation, betrayal, an unshakable feeling of losing control. Saad had not only disobeyed her, but had brought disgrace upon their home. And worst of all, the father was Kunal. Saad came out of the bathroom, still drying her hair, when she saw her stepmother standing in the middle of the room. Then she saw the pregnancy test in Aisha's hand. Her heart dropped. Aisha turned, her face unreadable. But Saad could see the fury burning in her eyes. "You're pregnant," Aisha said, her voice eerily calm. Saad couldn't speak. She felt her knees go weak, her hands trembling. Aisha took a slow step forward. "You let that filthy boy put his seed inside you?" she hissed. "After everything I told you?" Saad shook her head, trying to explain, but Aisha was already unraveling. "You have disgraced this family," she spat. "You are nothing but a foolish, reckless girl." Saada's eyes filled with tears of fear and frustration. "I love him," she whispered. "And this is my baby. You can't control me forever." The words hit Aisha like a slap. Control. That was what Saad thought this was about? The judge's fingers tightened around the pregnancy test. A dark thought crept into her mind, one she had never entertained before. She would not allow this disgrace to continue. She would not let a mere girl destroy the reputation she had spent years building. And if getting rid of the problem was the only way to ensure that, then so be it. Saad didn't know it, but the moment Aisha discovered the pregnancy, her fate was sealed. A storm was coming, one she would never escape. And before it was over, someone would die. The atmosphere in the Adegbite household turned ice cold after Aisha discovered Saada's pregnancy. The judge did not yell, did not throw things, did not even argue. Instead, Her silence became a weapon. She carried herself with an eerie calmness, moving through the house like a shadow, her expression unreadable. But Saad could feel it. The storm was coming. Aisha's wrath was not the kind that erupted instantly. No, she was far too calculated for that. Instead, she let the rage simmer beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She barely spoke to Saad, but her watchful eyes missed nothing. She monitored the girl's every move, her every breath. She was planning something and Saad knew it. But the young girl had already made up her mind. She would not give up her baby. No matter how much Aisha tried to intimidate her, she was determined to fight for her unborn child. And then, one evening, Aisha made her move. Saad was in her room, scrolling through her phone, when Aisha called her into the living room. She walked in cautiously, her heart pounding. Aisha sat on the couch, poised like a queen, her hands folded neatly in her lap. On the table before her lay a small, white envelope. "Sit," Aisha commanded. Saad obeyed, but every fiber of her being screamed at her to run. Aisha picked up the envelope and slid it toward her. "Open it." Saad hesitated before picking it up. As she pulled out the single sheet of paper inside, her blood ran cold. It was a signed medical authorization for an abortion. She snapped her head up. "What is this?" Aisha's lips curled into a thin smile. "You're going to the clinic tomorrow morning." Saada's hands trembled. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "No," she whispered. Aisha's expression darkened. "This is not a debate, Saad. You will get rid of that child, and this conversation will never happen again." Saada's anger flared. "You can't make me do this. This is my baby, my decision." Aisha leaned forward, her eyes burning with fury. "You are a child yourself, Saad. You have no idea what you're getting into. That useless boy cannot take care of you, and I will not allow you to drag this family's name through the mud over a mistake." Saad stood up abruptly, her breath ragged. "Kunal loves me. He wants this baby. You can't force me to." Aisha slammed her hand against the table, cutting her off. "Then leave," she spat. Saada's heart stopped. Aisha's eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth. "If you refuse to do what is right, then pack your things and leave my house," she said. "Go live with your musician boyfriend and see how far love gets you when you have no roof over your head." Saada's vision blurred with tears of shock and betrayal. Her own stepmother was throwing her out. "Aisha, please," she whispered, but there was no sympathy in the judge's eyes. "You have until morning to decide." Then she stood and walked away, leaving Saad to break apart in the silence. That night, Saad did the only thing she could. She ran to Kunal. Slipping out of the house, she rushed to his apartment, her body shaking with emotion. When he opened the door and saw her tear-streaked face, his heart broke. "What happened?" he asked, pulling her inside. Saad collapsed onto the couch. "She knows," she sobbed. "She knows about the baby. She wants me to get rid of it, or she's kicking me out." Kunal's jaw clenched. "She can't do that." "She already has," Saad whispered. "I have nowhere to go." Kunal held her tightly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You have me," he said. "We'll figure this out together." But deep down, Saad knew Aisha was not a woman to be defied, and she was not done yet. The next morning, when Saad returned home to gather her belongings, she found Aisha waiting in the doorway. "You've made your choice," Aisha said coldly. Saad squared her shoulders. "Yes, I have." The judge's face twisted in disgust. "Then you are no daughter of this house." Saad felt a lump rise in her throat, but she refused to let her stepmother see her cry. She turned and started to walk past Aisha, toward her room. But before she could take another step, Aisha's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. The grip was tight, bruising. "You will regret this," Aisha whispered, her voice dripping with venom. A chill ran down Saada's spine, because in Aisha's eyes, she saw something terrifying. Not just anger, not just hatred, something much, much darker. And in that moment, Saad realized, her stepmother wasn't just angry. She was capable of anything, even murder. Saad never saw the attack coming. That evening, she was in her bedroom, stuffing the last of her belongings into a backpack. Her plan was simple: leave before her father returned. She knew he would try to convince her to stay, and she couldn't risk giving Aisha more time to manipulate him. She had barely zipped the bag when the door creaked open. Aisha stood in the doorway, her face eerily calm, her hands clasped behind her back. "You're really leaving?" she said, her voice almost amused. Saad didn't answer. She threw the bag over her shoulder and tried to push past her, but Aisha blocked the doorway. "I gave you a choice," Aisha murmured. Saad swallowed, her heart pounding. "I made mine." For the first time, Aisha's mask of composure cracked. "You ungrateful little whore," she hissed. Before Saad could react, something cold and hard slammed into the side of her head. Pain exploded behind her eyes as she stumbled backward, collapsing onto the floor. Her vision blurred. The world spun. What had she just been hit with? Through the haze, she saw Aisha towering over her, clutching a heavy wooden gavel. Saada's stomach dropped. Her stepmother had just struck her with the same symbol of justice she wielded in court. Dazed, Saad tried to push herself up, but before she could move, the gavel came down again. Crack! A sickening crunch echoed through the room as the gavel collided with her skull. Saad screamed, but Aisha was relentless. Crack! Another blow. Then another. Blood splattered across the white walls, staining the pristine carpet. Saada's body convulsed, her hands twitching as if trying to fight back, but she was too weak. Crack! With one final strike, Saad stopped moving. Aisha stepped back, panting, staring down at what she had done. Her stepdaughter, the girl she had despised for so long, was finally silent. But this wasn't over yet. Aisha knew the law well enough to understand one thing: a judge caught committing murder would not get a second chance. She had to clean up the mess. Moving quickly, she grabbed her phone and dialed a number. "Meet me at the house," she whispered. "I need your help." The voice on the other end hesitated. "What happened?" "Just come," she snapped before hanging up. 15 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up outside. The driver stepped out. A man dressed in all black, his face shadowed by the night. His name was Inspector Jide Owalabi, a corrupt police officer who had done Aisha's dirty work for years. He entered the house and took one look at Saada's body before letting out a low whistle. "You really lost control this time," he muttered. Aisha straightened. "I need this gone." Jide sighed but nodded. "I'll handle it." Together, they wrapped Saada's body in bedsheets, careful to mop up the blood as they worked. Then, under the cover of darkness, they carried her out to the SUV. Aisha stood by the door, her hands still stained with blood, watching as the car disappeared into the night. Saad was gone, and by morning no one would ever know what happened. Or so she thought. The night was eerily silent as Aisha Adegbite stood in the dimly lit doorway, watching the black SUV disappear into the Lagos streets. Saad was gone, but the crime wasn't over, not yet. Aisha had spent her life upholding the law, ensuring that criminals faced justice. But now she was the criminal, and she knew better than anyone how the justice system worked. She had to erase every trace of her involvement. Inside the house, the once pristine bedroom was now a crime scene. Blood had seeped into the white carpet, staining it deep red. The gavel, the very instrument of her authority, was still covered in flesh and blood. Aisha felt no remorse, only the icy logic of a woman who could not afford to be caught. She moved quickly. She stripped the bed of its bloodied sheets and stuffed them into a black trash bag. She scrubbed the walls with bleach, careful to erase every stain. The gavel, her weapon of choice, was burned in the backyard fire pit, its wooden handle turning to ash within minutes. By the time she was done, there was no visible sign that a murder had taken place in the room. But she wasn't done yet. Aisha glanced at the clock. 11:45 p.m. By morning, people would start asking questions. She needed a solid alibi. She grabbed her phone and dialed Tund, her husband. When he answered, his voice was groggy. "Aisha? It's late." Aisha forced a calm tone. "Tund, I think Saad ran away. Silence. Then, what? She was upset when we talked earlier. I went to check on her just now, and she's gone. Aisha sighed. She took her bag. I think she went to Kunal's place. Tund cursed under his breath. That stubborn girl. I'll call Kunal. Aisha nodded, keeping her voice steady. I'll report her missing to the police in the morning if she doesn't come back. She hung up and exhaled. By planting the idea that Saad had left on her own, she was shifting suspicion away from herself. Now, she just had to make sure no one ever found the body. At the same time, Inspector Jide Owolabi drove through the outskirts of Lagos, his hands firm on the wheel. The wrapped body in the trunk was still lifeless. Jide had done this before many times for different clients. But this was different. This wasn't a street thug covering up a gang hit. This was a respected judge eliminating her stepdaughter. He shook his head, focusing on the road. Eventually, he reached his destination, a remote, swampy area on the outskirts of the city. There were no cameras, no lights, no witnesses. With a practiced motion, Jide hauled the body out of the trunk and carried it toward the edge of the murky water. He knew what he had to do. He retrieved a sack of cement mix from the trunk and began tying it to Sada's lifeless body. The weight would ensure that she sank and never resurfaced. As he shoved the body into the water, he watched as it slowly disappeared beneath the surface, swallowed by the dark abyss. He lit a cigarette and watched for a moment, making sure the water carried away any trace of evidence. Then, without a second glance, he got back into the SUV and drove away. Saad Adegbite was officially erased. By morning, Aisha was already at the police station, filing a missing persons report. She played the part of the worried stepmother perfectly, her voice trembling, her hands clutching a tissue. She's just a teenager. I'm afraid she might have done something reckless, she told the officers. Inspector Jide, standing in uniform, nodded along, acting as if he had no idea what had really happened. The search for Saad began immediately, but Aisha was confident no one would ever find her. She had planned every detail. She had covered every track. And as she sat in her car outside the police station, she allowed herself a small, victorious smile. Justice had been served, or so she thought, because what Aisha didn't know was that the dead never stay buried forever. For days, Aisha played the role of the devastated stepmother. She appeared on news stations, pleading for Sada's return. But then the first crack appeared. Kunal, Sada's boyfriend, came to the police station. She never came to my house, he told the officers. Aisha's story was unraveling. Then came the second crack. Sada's phone pinged. A detective traced her last known location, not far from Aisha's house. Tund, growing suspicious, demanded to see the CCTV footage from their estate. What he saw sent chills down his spine. Jide's SUV leaving the house late that night. Aisha had covered her tracks well, but the truth was beginning to surface. And soon justice would come for the judge. Tund confronted Aisha, his face pale with suspicion. Where is Saad? He demanded. Aisha kept her composure. I told you. She ran away. But Tund wasn't convinced. He took the CCTV footage to the police. Detectives started digging. Then came the final blow. A fisherman found a decomposed body tangled in the swamp. DNA confirmed it was Saad. When police arrested Inspector Jide, he broke under pressure. He confessed everything. Within hours, Judge Aisha Adegbite was in handcuffs. The woman who once served justice would now face it herself. The courtroom was packed. This time, Aisha was not the judge. She was the accused. The evidence was overwhelming. Jide's confession, CCTV footage, DNA results. Tund sat in silence, his once proud wife now a murderer in the eyes of the law. When the verdict was read, guilty of murder, Aisha barely flinched. Her punishment, death by hanging. As she was led away in handcuffs, she finally understood the weight of true justice. This time there was no escape.